does the saw class matter? And with respect to that, your slab design and costs are dependent upon that. So an A-class slab, it would be certainly a much more affordable slab. It's a thinner slab, so it's not quite as thick. Whilst a H or a P class slab would mean, you've certainly got your waffle pods, or if you've got a raft slab there, but you've got potentially piers in there, so concrete and steel running down into the ground. You may have deeper edge beams, etc. So these are all going to add to the cost. So the cost will be dependent upon what the recommendation is based on those classifications. I guess it's one of the most misunderstood parts of building is your site costs. And what I mean by that, like you said, Colin, is they can vary from builder to builder, right? They can vary from engineer to engineer, depending on their own risk assessment of that lot. It can also vary from block to block. So your neighbour might be cheaper than you are, but that could also be because your block had old trees on it previously, as an example, or there's greater fill on there. It's interesting. I was with a land guy on just a couple of days ago who's built before. In fact, Ben was on our podcast previously, Ben Stewart, and he was talking about a block he purchased some time ago that actually had a dam on it previously. And all of a sudden the site costs were extraordinarily more expensive because there was all this fill on there that needed to be considered as part of that. So these are all part of that, misconception around where site costs sit. It's also really important, I guess, after you've built, is to be managing the drainage around your home, right? And again, as part of, you'll see that builders do, factor a lot of there, and they're trying to make sure that the water's running away from the home. But even your landscaping, planting, plants too close to the home can have an impact on that. Even trees that are already on the block can have an impact on your slab design and how that's going to be, designed and factored in for. So you want to make sure that, other one would be things like street trees, Colin. Often we're having to address street trees in that slab design. So if you're on a standard block and you've got a tree out the front, most builders sort of account for that. But if you're on a corner block and there's two more trees down the side, they're not accounting for that. And they're often closer even than the one at the front, because you might only have a 2 metre side setback, for example. So, if, and it doesn't happen, but if those recommendations were to be ignored, you'd end up with things like cracks in your walls, shifting of your floor, long-term issues down the track, things like slab heave. So it's really important to make sure that, again, in some ways, over-engineering your slab's actually a good thing, Cole, as the end consumer. But understand if, and again, I feel at times some engineers will over-engineer. That comes at a cost of the consumer. They're going to pay a little bit more for their site cost when that is the case. So, it's certainly worth understanding that can have an impact